I'm wondering your thoughts on, because some of these ancient cities that you've referred to that have essentially, a lot of these cities in the post-flood world that have been buried due to these local floods, like Atlantis or El Dorado, you hear these stories or these depictions, right? You see these movies where these people were highly sophisticated, highly intelligent.
Never get your education from Hollywood, Donny. I keep telling
Right,
you that.
yeah, exactly. If Hollywood's portraying your idea, your doctrine, it's probably wrong. So, do you
Jurassic
think there's
Park,
any
example?
So, do you think there's a little bit of truth in the sense that after the flood, you have Noah's family, they reproduce, and they have all this knowledge that's accumulated, and so maybe they were a little more advanced at that time before they were flooded? Or I guess my question is, do you think there's any truth at all to what we see there?
Absolutely, that humans have had knowledge because Adam and Eve were pre-programmed minds. They had perfect
Right.
human minds, pre-programmed by God to start with, and they were doing things, including metallurgy, surveying, mathematics, construction of villages and cities. Um, they were doing all this. They had copper, iron, um, steel before the flood. You reach 8 generations to Tubal Cain and so forth, and they were smelting ores. They had a lot of knowledge. And of course, what does happen is knowledge actually gets lost over time and then rediscovered. Um, because after the flood, we have millions and millions of men and women working and acquiring knowledge and adding back up again. But they had knowledge that we still don't have. Um, think about it: building the pyramids, the obelisks that were built after the flood by the Egyptians, but
Right.
the pyramids of Egypt would be also equal to the pyramids in China, India, of course, Egypt, but also in South America, um, because pyramids, squares, rounds, rectangles are common known geographic and geometric um, symbols, and this is what they were building. They had incredible knowledge of astronomy. They were very good astronomers. Um, but we are finding thousands of new cities in the jungles of South America using lasers. Um, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what they were building in South America. But we also know that they were building massive structures, and of course, the Great Wall of China. But they were building massive structures and moving objects. There is one stone in the western wall of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah that is estimated to weigh 70 tons.
Wow.
And it is not a cube. Now, if it was a cube, you can understand how they might be able to move a cube without breaking it. But this is a very long rectangle, and it's stone. And it's Jerusalem stone. It is a good building stone because it's soft enough to be worked with, but very durable over time. But it does wear, and if it's 70 foot long, how did they move it? Because it should have flexed and cracked, but it's not. So they knew how to do things that we couldn't do today with diesel engines and pulleys.
Well, according to evolution, with enough time and mutations and work, you can take fish to fishermen. So maybe with enough time and working out, Dr. Grady, we'll be able to lift 17 tons one day. Is that possible?
70 tons.
70 tons. Okay. Well, then in that case. So right there, more fascinating points, Dr. Grady.
Obelisks that, again, made in Egypt and other places that you wonder how. Now, I think we have a pretty good idea on actually how they did set them upright. But set them upright without cracking is another question.
Well, you hear, and this is why the Bible has all the answers, brother, because you hear these theories like ancient alien theories, which I was sucked into years and years ago before I became a Christian, because you hear Stonehenge and these pyramids, and all of these sophisticated structures that some in the naturalist camp or those that are not Christian, they'll say, well, there's no way humans could have built these. And so aliens must have visited us and helped with these structures.
I remember Donnegan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's as bogus could possibly be. First of all, just from a biblical standpoint, Psalm 115 says this is the only place that there are people, the only thing made in the image of God.
That's right.
Jesus came here and died once for all, which is totally inclusive. But from a scientific standpoint, I think people forget. Scientifically, until we actually find it, it doesn't exist. You can make all the claims about aliens and everything else you want to, but the people who have quote unquote seen these things, what are they actually seeing? Well, they're seeing demonic activity.
Right.
If God's angels can take the form of humans, and they're always men, they're never any women, but always in the form of men, in order not to be monstrous, then satanic fallen angels can take the form of alien creatures in order to be mysterious or again, terrifying, or an object like a UFO, and do things because they're supernatural beings that would not be possible in the natural. People forget because they're, how shall we say this? They are influenced, indoctrinated by sci-fi movies such as Star Wars and Star Trek and all those, that you can fly, across the galaxies and from one part of the universe, the Delta Quadrant, to try to get back to the Alpha Quadrant.
Right.
But there are some very serious limitations. It takes 4.3 years to get to the closest star outside of our solar system at the speed of light. Fastest thing we can build currently, it would take 50,000 years to get there. But let's say we could go at warp 5, 6, whatever. And they say, well, that's the answer. We just get bigger, better engines and we fly at faster and faster speeds. But of course, the laws of relativity, both special and general, would give you some very serious problems with that. There is another problem that people forget. The idea we're going to zoom from this solar system to another solar system and so forth. It's great science fiction. I like good science fiction. But they forget it's not going to happen. The physics of these movies doesn't work in reality. And I point this out to people sometimes. What is the single factor that is going to prevent us from, getting in some vessel we construct with warp engines, and but what is the single biggest constraint to that kind of travel? Can you figure it out?
The biggest constraint to that kind of travel that we see in Star Trek and Star Wars?
Well, or even the concept. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have. Now, mind you, the physics of those movies don't work.
Right.
But what's the single biggest constraint in us even ever doing something of that nature?
Just the advances that would be necessary to build those structures. I don't think they're possible. I mean, I'm not sure, Dr. Grady. What you give me the answer? Gravity. I'll throw that out there.
No, gravity exists everywhere. It's just microgravity between galaxies, or solar systems, whatever. It isn't water. It isn't oxygen. Doesn't necessarily have to be fuel, because we can get fuel on the way. No, the single biggest constraint is called friction.
Okay. We've got people in the chat saying mass and fuel. So people are enjoying this. They're giving their answers, but friction is the
laws of again, special and general relativity. Mass becomes a problem because as you accelerate the speed of light, mass increases, length shortens, time comes to a stop, and all, and those would be good answers. But the one single thing that absolutely says we'll never do it is friction. People forget. They think that space is a vacuum. And yes, it comes very close, but space is not a true vacuum. There's gas molecules and dust particles. Now, they might be 3 feet apart, 6 feet apart. I don't care if they're a mile apart. The problem is friction, because if an object is flying through space, you're going to hit things. And I
Right.
don't mean the sun. I'm simply talking about the fact that friction. Have you ever been to a space museum, such as the Smithsonian, or down here? We have several space museums here in the areas of the Cape, near where I live. Um, I don't know if there's a space museum in Canada, but I suspect there's something. You had Canadian astronauts. Um, but have you ever taken a look at any of these things that have been in space and then come back down and put in a museum? For instance, the Mercury capsule. We have a Mercury capsule, and they did not touch it up. They simply, as is, put it in the museum so everybody could see what it was like after it came back. Right? Look at the windows. Now this is thick, heavy glass, and you can see etched scratches on the glass because 250 miles up, it's hitting stuff. Well, if you're going to travel light years, that much
Right.
distance, that's a light year, roughly 5.8 trillion miles, and you're going to do it year after year for a while, the erosion would actually eat through the spaceship.
Wow. Well, I guess that's why they call it science fiction, which, like you, I like a good science fiction story, a good science fiction movie, but a lot in the naturalist camp, they leave out they forget the fiction aspect of it. Is that right, Dr. Grady?
And good science fiction is often predictive of the future, such as Jules Verne.
Hmm.
His story of the Nautilus was very, very predictive. Now, his shot to the moon wasn't as predictive in method, but we did eventually go to the moon. You know, um, but his story of the Nautilus was terrific in terms of the prophetic nature of the science fiction. Um, but you cannot take a gun and shoot a body with this beam and have it disappear. That would again defy the laws of physics. You might kill somebody, but they aren't going to disappear. They're
Right.
not going to literally become nothing. Maybe a pile of ash, but there's going to be stuff left over.
So it sounds like contrary. I know you've spoken on this, contrary to what those in the evolutionary community, evolutionist camp, say, that biological organisms, humans in general, are getting better, bigger, stronger, faster, smarter. Seems to be the opposite of that. Now we've accumulated knowledge, sure, but where'd that knowledge come from?
Humans are the only creature that can acquire knowledge and accumulate it over generations. Lions don't do that. Elephants don't do that. Dogs can learn tricks while they're alive, but they don't pass it on to the next generation. And so humans are the only creature that can learn, acquire knowledge, pass it on, and add to it in generations. So today we know more than they may have known at before the flood. But that's only because of millions and millions of man and woman hours accumulating knowledge, passing it on to others, and finding out that much of their knowledge was not true. You know, 1668, Reddy proved that life did not spontaneously come out of a pile of rotting rags, or life didn't spontaneously generate.
That's right.
And of course, Pasteur put the cork on that bottle. But life only comes from life and only reproduces after its own kind. That's a scientifically proven principle. Life does not spontaneously generate. For the complexity of life to come into existence, you have to have a greater intelligence outside. There's many things, but simply because we know more now than we knew 300 years ago, individually, we are not as intelligent. We have, of course, our bodies are deteriorating. That's genetic entropy. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
We're not getting bigger, better, faster, smarter. We're getting smaller, slower, and dumber. And that's simply the truth. That's the scientific reality of it. And if it kept going, the humanity would cease to exist because we would eventually lose so much genetic information, generation to generation, that we would become sterile and extinct. So we are not getting bigger, better, faster, smarter. And we know that all life forms that we find today, if we can find it a similar thing in the fossil record, they're always bigger in the past than they are today. This is the thing that just amazes me. You know, if you can find a creature alive today and it's representative in the fossil record, number one, they're the same in appearance, but in the past they will be greater in size.
Right. Now,
And so things are going downhill, not uphill, and that totally contradicts the evolutionary view.
well, I like that you pointed that out. It completely wrecks and contradicts the evolutionary view.